Alright YouTube, so today we are going to look at a kind of absurd article that is almost demanding that game developers start adding a skip boss fight button to their games. Now the article comes from the website Rock Paper Shotgun. Now I've known the name for a very long time, like I recognize the name Rock Paper Shotgun. I've never personally looked at them, I've never known really anything about their website, so I had to kind of look into it to see if this was like a satirical like article, if it was like a joke or something, because I've actually done this before where I started recording videos and then I get deeper into the article and I start realizing maybe this isn't real, and I'll look it up and it's like a joke website. I'm like, god damn it, just wasted hours of my life. But from everything that I can gather, they are a serious website. They do just reviews of games, just general gaming news, esports, guides, all that type of shit. So everything I can see, they are a serious website, which means that this post is actually serious. So the article itself is titled, "Now Ubisoft's Open the Door, Can We Have Our Skip Boss Fight Button?" Ubisoft made a fascinating announcement this week. They revealed that the latest Assassin's Creed is to add a discovery mode, removing all the combat and challenges from the game to let players just freely experience the in-depth recreation of ancient Egypt. It's fascinating to me because it's a big deal. And goodness me, it shouldn't be a big deal, because games should be delighted to include modes that remove all the difficulty and challenge, and players should cheer when they hear about it. So essentially what Discovery Mode is going to be is it turns off like all the enemies, there's no story, there's no time constraints, and you can just explore the world, just absorb in the scenery, maybe try to go like into the pyramids and discover secrets and stuff like that. I don't know if you can find like items and loot and things like that, but you can just pretty much free roam without worrying about any enemies or story modes, missions, random encounters, nothing like that. You can just have fun. This shit to me sounds extremely interesting. Like, to the best of my knowledge, this is a very original, like, concept for a game. Now, obviously, I don't know every goddamn game in existence, so I can't recall if any game's ever done this before, but the ability to just, like, turn off all the enemies and just explore the world sounds pretty damn original. Like, I don't know why more games don't do this. Like, something like GTA, look at the GTA series. If you can just turn off all the cops and enemies and just kind of explore Rockstar's worlds in their games, that'd be fucking awesome. Same thing with, like, Fallout or Elder Scrolls. If you can just turn off all the enemies and just explore like the caves and locations and towers and all that shit, that would be interesting. So to me, this seems like a pretty original idea. I'm not playing dumb here. I'm not being coy. I know an awful lot of what's made gaming culture such a miserably toxic environment over the last few years is deeply wrapped up in subjects like this. And those who spread the toxicity are those most likely to be on the side of condemning gaming options that remove challenge, that make the hobby more accessible to the crowds. For one, that's a very long fucking sentence. But at the same time, I'm not going to allow the sewage to pollute my opinions and my delight in expressing those opinions. And I've long been arguing that gaming can be a far better place if the industry would only introduce the skip boss fight button. Yes, of course, skip boss fight is a totem for my larger point here, and it's a title under which I'd include Ubisoft's recent announcement, despite their rather awkwardly trying to wrap it all up as wanting to be edumacational. That is so fucking cringy. It's the spirit such an option captures, and it's one that I think the industry would do well to breathe deeply into their souls. This is ground I've covered before, and each time there's been a very similar reaction. In 2009, I suggested it was daft that I'm not able to just skip ahead while playing a game, like I could in a film, book, or TV show. Of course that's daft. I wrote back in 2012 about the idea of being able to skip fights as a reaction to the despicable response to BioWare's Jennifer Hepler's suggesting that game combat should be skippable. Of course it should. Last year I talked about how deeply peculiar is the perceived notion that people have to be good at games for them to be properly enjoyed. Of course they don't. And in light of this seismic "this shouldn't be, oh, it shouldn't be" announcement regarding Assassin's Creed Unity, I want to reiterate it once more. Let other people play games their way. So kind of a lot to respond to there. For starters, they said Assassin's Creed Unity at the end. Now, unless I'm missing something, I'm assuming they actually meant to say Assassin's Creed Origins, which is the brand new one they're talking about that has the discovery mode. Also, you gotta respect the irony at the end there of them saying let people play games their way, when this entire article is based around games that have hard boss fights and hard combat in general, and they want them to change. Just kind of funny to me to see that there at the end. But near the beginning of that part, they say they want to be able to skip ahead in games like they can in books, films, and TV shows. That just doesn't make any sense. Those are entirely different mediums. They're similar in some ways, but they're entirely different things. Be able to skip ahead in a video game just kind of defeats the purpose of a video game in general. Like, the whole point of a video game is to play it from the beginning to the end, really. And there are games that offer the ability to skip ahead. If you look at like the Telltale Walking Dead series, like you can play, there's usually like 5 chapters, to each season, you can start at any chapter you want, and it'll just auto-generate choices for you from the previous chapters. So, like, say you start on chapter 3 for whatever reason, it'll auto-generate things you did in chapter 1 and 2, deaths, character choices, things like that. And as we've seen by that last, paragraph that I read, this person has a history of, bitching about games being too difficult since at least 2009, according to their quote right there. They've been bitching about, being able to skip things in video games since 2009. I don't mind games that have the option, but demanding it, thinking that every single game needs to have the option to skip combat, skip fights, just skip ahead in general. What is this person's thought process? Gaming has always been inclusive. The idea that there was this golden age when all games were crippling hard and only the chosen were able to play is bullshit. In fact, back in these imagined halcyon years was when games invariably came with cheat codes, god modes, all sorts of ways to subvert and play differently. And despite the outright terror that articles like this are harming their precious gaming, that the outsiders are changing games to what the self-identifying us perceive as worse, we're currently experiencing a heyday for super high difficulty, super challenging, extremely tough games like we never have before. Funny that. Man, some of these sentences are too damn long where I gotta do that shit in 2 takes because I can't stop or pause because it's all one big ass sentence. So to kind of reiterate what the person's saying in that part of the article is a lot of older games are deemed harder than modern games. But they're trying to argue that point by saying that a lot of older games had cheat modes, god modes. So not only does this person want the ability to skip forward in games at any point in time, skip just general combat when they can, skip boss fights, they also now want games to have cheat modes and god modes, etc. This is some of the whiniest bullshit I've ever fucking heard, dude. Some people love the general sense of accomplishment when there's a boss that you fight a few times. They kill you a few times, you gotta figure out their strategy, what their moves are, how they fight, and everything like that. And you eventually, on maybe your 3rd, 4th, 5th time, you finally beat them. That's a sense of accomplishment, and that's what a lot of people play these harder video games for. Now, I'm not one of these get-good elitists, but I can see the appeal of something like the Dark Souls series, where it's general combat is hard, general enemies are hard, and you have really hard boss fights. I can see why people love playing those games and beating them. I bought a Nintendo Switch recently, and have been playing Zelda Breath of the Wild as much as I possibly can. We're skipping past that bullshit. It's an extraordinary game, vast and intricate and ludicrously alive. But because it's a Zelda game, hell, because it's a Nintendo game, it has boss fights. And I can do them. They're much easier than the average. I still hate them. So at this point in the article, the person is saying that they play Breath of the Wild. The boss fights in that game are easier than a lot of other games. They can even do them. They're not even that difficult. They can complete the boss fights, and yet they're still complaining. So now it's not even that boss fights are too hard or just a hard part of the game. They just don't want to do boss fights in general. I've long hated boss fights as chronicled perennially on these pages because their difficulty spikes as game design. There's something that should be rooted out by beta testing somehow being given feature status. And yes, for some reason people love them so, but just as many, if not more, can't stand them. Dark Souls wouldn't be a bloody genre if people didn't love a boss fight, but while it falls just short of selling 7 billion copies, it's inarguable that there are people who do not enjoy boss fights. And when your game is made of boss fights tied together with string, then yes, it's plainly idiotic for a hater to buy it. Here's the magic though. If games had a button that let you skip past these incongruous segments so you could carry on enjoying the great game on the other side, that button could just as easily not be pressed. So I get what they're saying right there. If there is a button or an option to skip a boss fight, you don't have to press that. If that is in your game, you can just as easily fight the boss or, die a lot, come back and fight the boss until you inevitably beat them, or you could just skip it. Either way, there's really no harm in having a skip the boss fight button. But at the same time, if you're just skipping segments of the game, boss fights, general combat, fast forwarding through a game, there is zero sense of accomplishment. Why would you even want that? Why would you pay $60 generally for a brand new game just to be skipping around and not even playing it? The argument against the skip button, the tourist mode, the skippable combat, the fast forward at level, all these ideas that keep coming up is always the same. It's always, but someone might press them. It's not an enormously strong argument, all things considered. It's one I'd like to try to counter. Yes, they might. Okay, it's slightly more nuanced than that, although it's never actually expressed truthfully. The argument tends to go, but someone other than me might press them, and then they'd get to see a bit of the game that was meant only for the deserving champions. Because the real nub of it is, it's about exclusivity. It's about keeping the thems, the riffraff, the outsider out. This section of the game, this is special to me and only those as great as I am. I deserve this bit of the game. Those weaklings do not. Gosh, it's an ugly way of thinking, isn't it? And so utterly idiotic too. because it requires the mental gymnastics of somehow believing that one's own isolated experience of a game is cheapened, lessened, impacted in any conceivable way by the isolated experience of someone else playing that game. It is the transference of one's ego onto the game itself. It's not a healthy way to go about experiencing life. Whoever it was that wrote this article, man, you need a fucking hobby. You're looking way too much into this shit. Even though it somewhat proves their point from this article, I agree with the fact that if you cannot beat the boss, you don't deserve to go past them. That's just how it is. Now, I'm not totally against the idea of a skip boss button, but at the same time, it's like, if you can't beat them, why should you be allowed to go past this point? Most games have a boss fight at the end of a level, and you gotta beat that to continue the game. If you're able to just skip that, what would be the point of having the boss fight at all? And actually, a majority of games don't even have really that complicated boss fights. Not everything is fucking Dark Souls. Not everything's out there to challenge your every skill you have when it comes to a video game. Most games are generally, they'll be a little bit harder than the general enemies, of course, but no games really have that complicated of bosses. There's more to the article. We skipped paragraphs here and there, and there's a couple paragraphs after that last one in case you care to go read it and see this person cry some more. It'll be linked below in case you want to check out the article. Look, boss fights have been around since as far back as I can remember. Hell, they were in the original Mario game, if not before then. I mean, at the end of every castle, you had to fight Bowser. Technically a boss fight. And some random article on a website called the Rock Paper Shotgun is not going to change that. Nobody's ever going to get rid of boss fights. I don't know if any games are going to ever implement a skip boss fight button. They might, but I highly fucking doubt it, because all you're doing is whining this entire article. You're not really proving anything. Like, you don't have any real credible evidence as to why there needs to really be one, other than that people that do enjoy boss fights and like beating bosses are just elitists who think they're better than everybody else that can, which is not fucking true in the slightest. They probably exist to a degree, but that's not what it's all about. Now, me as a gamer, I don't go into a boss fight wanting to die, obviously. And if I beat a boss in one try, it's not really there's not really a whole lot of sense of accomplishment unless it was a really hard fight. So if a boss kills me a few times and then I eventually beat them, I feel a sense of accomplishment. I'm proud of myself because I finally beat this dude that's killed me multiple times. I don't really see, like, the issue with boss fights at all. And me, like most gamers out there, I'm sure, there's a lot of games that offer super bosses, like hidden bosses that are stronger than the boss at the end of the game. I look for that shit. I strive to beat that guy. I like that. I'm proud of that. That's something I like fighting something that has 50 million health and fucking killing it. But it's not something I brag about. I don't go in the streets with a megaphone telling everybody, I beat this super boss in X game. Are you proud of me? Because nobody's going to give a fuck. There's no elitist thing when it comes to video game bosses, because nobody gives a shit what you've done in your game. I'm only concerned with what I'm doing. In the end, if they implemented a skip boss fight button into games, it really wouldn't affect anything, because you can either use it or not. If you're not somebody who gives a shit about skipping boss fights, you won't. You'll just fight the boss until you inevitably beat them. And if you're somebody who can't beat them, you'll eventually skip the boss fight. It does not matter in the slightest. I don't think it's ever going to be a widespread thing. I don't know if any games are ever even going to implement it at all, but it'll never be a widespread thing where you're seeing it in every game that comes out. So let me know your thoughts below on this article. I imagine the person behind writing this lives in a constant state of triggered. They get offended by everything. They can't stand not having their way constantly. And I don't even understand why you'd want somebody who writes like this for your article representing you. If you went on to enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @the-david. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face. Tell me that you love me, even if it's fake, 'cause I don't fucking care.